"Will you please tell my dad to stop making Grandma cry?" the boy asked the hospital's chief of medicine, standing barefoot in the hallway at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Dr. Callum Reeves heard the words before he fully registered the child. He had been walking the third-floor corridor of St. Raleigh, Brendan's regional medical center, with a patient chart tucked under his arm, his mind already on the morning surgical schedule, when something small and warm caught the edge of his peripheral vision. A boy, maybe 6 years old, dark hair sticking up on one side from sleep, wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs t-shirt, 2 sizes too big and no socks on the cold linoleum floor. Callum stopped. He looked down the hallway in both directions, empty. The night nursing station was 30 meters away, its blue glow steady and indifferent. He looked back at the boy. "Where did you come from?" Callum asked. The boy pointed toward room 318, Grandma's room. He had a paper cup of apple juice in one hand and a small stuffed dog tucked under his other arm. He looked at Callum with the direct, unblinking calm that only very young children and very old people manage. "Dad yelled at the nurse again," Grandma cried. "She doesn't like it when he yells." Callum stood there holding his chart. He knew room 318. Agnes Beaumont, 74 years old, post-operative recovery following a hip replacement, progressing well by clinical standards. Her son, Victor Beaumont, had been a recurring problem since the evening of admission. Demanding, loud in the corridors, questioning every nursing decision with the tone of a man who believed his presence alone should restructure the care plan. Callum had received 3 separate reports from his floor nursing staff in 4 days. He had not yet addressed it directly. He told himself he would get to it. The surgical queue had been brutal that week. He looked at the boy again. "What's your name?" Callum asked. "Theo." "Theo." Callum crouched down so he was at eye level. The linoleum was cold even through his shoes. "Does your dad know you're out here?" Theo considered this seriously. "No." He's still talking loud. He offered Callum the apple juice with a small, matter-of-fact gesture, as though sharing it was the obvious next step. "You can have some if you want. I didn't drink from it yet." Callum looked at the paper cup. Something about the gesture, the total sincerity of it, caught somewhere behind his sternum. He cleared his throat. "That's all right, Theo. You keep it." He straightened up, looked toward room 318, and made a decision he should have made 3 days earlier. Victor Beaumont was a man who filled a room the way weather fills a room, loudly and without asking permission. He was 47, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of permanent scowl that suggested the world had personally inconvenienced him on multiple occasions. When Callum walked through the door of room 318, Victor was standing near the window with his arms crossed, his voice still elevated from whatever had just happened, the night nurse already retreating. Agnes was sitting up in bed, her hands folded over the blanket. Her eyes were red at the corners. She looked at Callum with an expression he recognized, the look of someone who was very tired of being the reason other people argued. "Mr. Beaumont," Callum said. His voice was level. "Not warm." Victor turned. His posture shifted slightly, not softening but recalibrating. People did that when they met Callum for the first time. He was 41, 6 feet and a fraction, and he had spent enough years in operating theaters and boardrooms to have developed a stillness that tended to make rooms go quieter. "You, the attending." "I'm Dr. Reeves, Chief of Medicine." Callum set the chart down on the small bedside table. "Your mother is doing well. Her pain scores are acceptable. Her mobility is improving on schedule, and she will likely be cleared for discharge by Thursday if recovery continues." He paused. "What I need to speak with you about is something different." Victor uncrossed his arms. "If this is about earlier—" "Your son is in the hallway," Callum said. Silence. Agnes made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Victor's jaw tightened. He walked past Callum without responding and opened the door. Theo was there, standing just outside, still holding his apple juice and his stuffed dog. He looked up at his father with the particular expression children get when they are not sure whether they are in trouble. Victor stared at him for a long moment. Something moved through his face that Callum couldn't fully read from across the room. "Get in here," Victor said finally. His voice had dropped. Theo came in and immediately went to the side of the bed. He climbed carefully up beside his grandmother, favoring her left side, Callum noticed, instinctively avoiding the operated hip, and tucked himself against her. Agnes put her arm around him without looking. The gesture was automatic, practiced. The gesture of a grandmother who had spent years absorbing small bodies into her side. Callum looked at the three of them. He thought about saying something clinical, something about visiting hours, about the importance of the patient's rest, about hospital protocol. He said none of it. "Mr. Beaumont, step outside with me for a moment." In the corridor, with the door pulled half-shut behind them, Callum kept his voice quiet. "I want to be direct with you. My nursing staff has flagged 3 separate incidents in 4 days. Tonight makes 4. Your mother's recovery is being affected not by her hip, but by stress. Cortisol elevation delays tissue repair. That's not a sentiment, that's physiology." He let that land. "Whatever is happening between you and this hospital's staff, it ends tonight. Not because I'm asking you, because your mother's body is paying for it." Victor said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at the half-open door, at the sliver of room visible through it. His mother, his son, the lamp by the bed making everything amber. "I just want her home," Victor said. The aggression had drained out of him with no fanfare. He sounded suddenly like a man who hadn't slept properly in a week. Callum looked at him. "She will be. Thursday, let us do our work." He walked back to the nursing station. He did not look back. But he did think about Theo for the rest of his shift. About the apple juice. About the way the boy had climbed up onto the bed and navigated around his grandmother's injured hip without being told. 6 years old, already taking care. Callum had grown up watching someone who worked like that, someone who absorbed every difficulty quietly and kept moving. He had not thought about his father in a long time. He had gotten quite good at not thinking about him. He sat down at the station and opened his scheduling system and stayed there until 2 in the morning, which was nothing unusual. The next morning, St. Brendan's ran the way it always ran, with the particular controlled chaos of a mid-sized regional hospital in a mid-sized Ontario city. Callum moved through his rounds with the efficiency his staff had come to expect. He was not unkind, but he was precise, and he had a reputation for running tight ships that did not tolerate drift. The department had been through 2 difficult years: funding cuts, staff attrition, a waiting room backlog that made every day feel like triage. He had restructured 3 departments and absorbed the blame for the unpopular decisions that came with it. He did not complain about this. He did not particularly discuss it. What he did not do was sit still. By 7:30 he had completed rounds, reviewed overnight admissions, and responded to 11 emails. By 8:15 he was in the first of what would be 4 consecutive administrative meetings. His assistant, a brisk woman named Sandra, had learned to leave his coffee outside the door so he could collect it between sessions without breaking stride. He did not notice most days that she did this. He assumed the coffee appeared because he had asked for it once 2 years ago and the system had simply continued. That was how good systems worked. He noticed it that morning. He wasn't sure why. He picked up the cup and stood there for a moment in the corridor and looked at it. Sandra was already back at her desk, headset on, talking to someone about equipment requisitions. She had not waited for a thank you. She didn't operate on thank yous. She operated on the department continuing to function. Callum thought about his father again. He put the thought away and went into the meeting. Agnes Beaumont was discharged on Thursday as planned. Callum signed the paperwork himself, which was not strictly necessary but felt like the appropriate close to the situation. Victor Beaumont, to his credit, was quieter. He shook Callum's hand in the corridor and said simply, "She looks better." He did not apologize for the previous days. Callum did not require it. The outcome was the same either way. Theo was there with a drawing he had done on a piece of the hospital's printer paper, a building that was probably meant to be St. Brendan's, rendered in blue crayon with what appeared to be a flag on top. He held it out to Callum without ceremony. "For you," he said, "because you were nice to Grandma." Callum took the drawing. "Thank you, Theo. You can put it on your wall." Callum looked at the drawing, then at the boy. "I'll do that." He did not put it on his wall. He put it in his desk drawer, which was not the same thing but was not nothing. 2 weeks passed. The backlog did not improve. The funding review was postponed again. 3 nurses from the overnight rotation put in transfer requests. Callum read each one, understood each one, and spent an evening writing a formal brief to the regional health authority that he already knew would take 6 weeks to be acknowledged and longer to act upon. He sent it anyway. He was at his desk at 7:30 on a Wednesday evening when Sandra appeared in the doorway, which was unusual because Sandra did not usually stay past 5:30. She was wearing her coat. She had her bag over her shoulder. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had decided to say something she had been not saying for some time. "I'm going to tell you something," Sandra said, "and I want you to hear it as information, not criticism." Callum put down his pen. "You are the only person in this building who doesn't know that the overnight nursing staff has started a rotation to make sure someone is always within earshot of your office," she said. "Not because there's a protocol. Because they're worried about you. You haven't eaten lunch at a table in 6 weeks. Your lights are on when I arrive and on when I leave. Dr. Reeves, the department follows your lead. When you run yourself into the ground, they believe that's the standard." The room was very quiet. Callum thought about saying that he was fine. He thought about saying that the situation was temporary and the brief would eventually move something and the backlog would stabilize. He thought about all the true, insufficient things he could say. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. Sandra looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Theodore Beaumont called the hospital today," she said. "The boy. Apparently his grandmother told him you kept the drawing, and he wanted to know if it was really on your wall." She paused. "I told him yes." Callum looked at the desk drawer. "Go home, Dr. Reeves," Sandra said, and she left. He sat there for a while after she left. The building was evening quiet around him, the specific quiet of a hospital after the main daytime current has subsided, when the machines are still running but the human noise has dropped to a lower frequency. He knew this quiet well. He had spent most of the last decade inside it. He opened the drawer and took out Theo's drawing. The building in blue crayon had a flag. The flag was a heart. He had not noticed that the first time. His own father had worked the kind of hours that made a house feel like it had a ghost in it, present in form, absent in the ways that counted. Callum had understood, intellectually for many years, that his father had not been indifferent. He had been frightened. He had been carrying something he did not know how to put down. The hospital, the patients, the impossible math of too many sick people and not enough of everything else. It had not been a choice he had made coldly. It had been a drowning he had managed quietly, and Callum had grown up watching it and decided, without ever quite deciding, to do the same thing. He sat there with the drawing in his hands. The next morning he arrived at 7 as usual. He did 3 things differently. He stopped at the nursing station and spoke directly to the overnight team before they changed out. Not about patient files, not about staffing numbers, but about the transfer requests. He told them he had read every one. He told them he understood why and that the brief was submitted and that he would follow up weekly until it moved. He did not promise outcomes he could not deliver. He just made sure they knew they had been heard. He ate lunch at a table. It was 11:47, which is not technically lunch, and it was a sandwich from the vending machine on the 2nd floor, which is not technically a meal, but he sat down and he did not look at his phone while he ate it. And in the afternoon, he called Sandra into his office and asked her, directly, which he had apparently never done, what she actually needed to do her job better. She stared at him for a moment as though recalibrating. Then she sat down and told him. It took 40 minutes. He wrote it down. None of this fixed the backlog. None of it changed the funding. The structural problems of the system remained exactly what they were, and Callum Reeves was one person with a title and a brief and a desk drawer containing a child's drawing. But the overnight nurses stopped the rotation, not because the concern went away. Because when Paulette, the senior overnight nurse, was asked about it later, she said he started showing up differently. It was small things, but you notice. 6 months after Agnes Beaumont's discharge, a small thing happened. The hospital's Patient Experience Committee, a body Callum had considered largely ceremonial, submitted a proposal for a dedicated family rest space on the 3rd-floor recovery ward, a room with chairs that were actually comfortable, a coffee station that worked, A small area where children who had been brought along in crises could sit somewhere that was not a cold hallway floor. The proposal had been drafted, it turned out, by a volunteer who had started contributing to the committee after her mother's positive experience at St. Brendan's. Her name was Agnes Beaumont. Callum read the proposal twice. Then he approved it, redirected a modest budget from a line item that had been sitting unallocated for 8 months, and sent it to implementation. He did not make an announcement. He did not call anyone to say he was doing it. Sandra found out through the facilities coordinator and appeared in his doorway again. "You approved the family room." "The proposal was sound," Callum said. She looked at him. "Victor Beaumont called this morning. He wanted to speak with you directly." Callum picked up the phone. Victor's voice on the other end was different from the voice in room 318. Quieter. A little worn in the way that a few months of reckoning can make a voice. "I wanted to say something I should have said in June," Victor said. "I was taking something out on people who didn't deserve it. I know that's not an excuse. I wanted to name it." "I appreciate that," Callum said. And he meant it, though he did not say more than that. "Theo still talks about you," Victor said. "He told his teacher he wants to be a doctor." Callum said nothing for a moment. The morning light was coming in at a low angle through the window of his office, the way it did in November, flat and clear and honest. "He'll be a good one," he said. After he hung up, he did something he had not done in this office. He got up, went to the wall directly beside the window, and taped Theo's drawing there. Blue crayon, approximate building, flag with a heart. Sandra passed the open door 20 minutes later, stopped, looked at the wall, and said nothing. She went back to her desk. When Callum came out an hour later to collect the morning's files, she handed them to him and said, quietly, "Better." He walked back into his office and started his day. The hallway on the 3rd floor was the same hallway it had always been, long, institutional, lit with the particular flatness of fluorescent light. The nursing station hummed at one end. The new family room was at the other, its door usually open, a warm lamp visible through the gap. Someone's child coloring at the small table inside. Callum passed it every morning on his rounds. He never stopped, but he always looked. Some systems cannot be fixed by one person. Some things take longer than is reasonable and cost more than is fair and require a patience that starts to feel like surrender. Callum Reeves knew all of this. He had written briefs about all of this. He would write more. But a 6-year-old boy in a maple leaf shirt had stood in a cold hallway and offered him a cup of apple juice, and something in the machine had shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but in the way that real things shift, quietly, in the small hours, while the rest of the building was sleeping. I keep thinking about the apple juice. Not the boardroom moments, not the formal apology, not even the drawing that ended up on the wall. Just a 6-year-old boy standing alone in a hospital corridor at 11:30, holding out a paper cup to a stranger, because that was the only thing he had to offer, and he offered it anyway. There's something in that gesture I haven't been able to shake. Callum Reeves was not a bad man. That's the part that sits with me. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't indifferent in the way people choose to be indifferent. He was someone who had learned, very early, that the way you survive hard things is to keep moving through them. And somewhere along the way, he had confused surviving with leading. He built a department that ran on his example without ever intending to. That's how it usually works. The people around us don't follow our instructions half as closely as they follow our habits. What changed him wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a single moment of clarity. It was the accumulation of small, honest things. A child's question he couldn't answer clinically, a cup of juice he didn't take, a drawing he didn't throw away, Sandra standing in his doorway telling him the truth because someone had to. None of it was grand. All of it was real. And the reason it reached him, I think, is because somewhere underneath all the scheduling and the briefs and the controlled efficiency, Callum still had the capacity to be reached. He hadn't closed that off entirely. He just buried it under a lot of necessary work and told himself he'd come back to it later. That's the thing about integrity. And I mean it in the plainest sense, not the motivational poster sense. It's not about the big decisions. It's about whether you're still capable of noticing when something matters. Callum noticed Theo. He noticed the drawing had a heart on the flag. He noticed that Sandra had been leaving coffee outside his door for 2 years and he had never once said thank you. Noticing is the beginning of everything else. And then there's Theo himself, who I find myself returning to more than any other part of this story. 6 years old, navigating a hospital at night, climbing onto a bed and instinctively avoiding his grandmother's injured hip, offering his juice to a man who had the power to change nothing and everything. Where does that come from in a child? I think it comes from watching someone persist. Agnes had clearly shown him, in the way grandmothers show things without explaining them, that you keep showing up for the people you love, even when it costs you. Theo had absorbed that completely. He didn't know the word for it. He just lived it. That persistence, the willingness to keep going not because you're certain it will work, but because the alternative is giving up on someone you care about, is the quiet engine of every good outcome in the story. Marigold had it, Agnes had it. Eventually, Callum found his way back to it. None of these people were exceptional in the ways we usually celebrate. They were just honest enough to act on what they saw, and stubborn enough not to stop. I think that's enough. I think most of the time, that's exactly enough.